Welcome to No Longer Conformed. I'm Erik Garthe, and we are in class with Moses, Lessons of Ministry Calling. In this session, we'll be looking at Exodus chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. This is not going to be easy. Let's read those verses. Exodus 5:22. Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all." Moses and his older brother Aaron accepted God's call to go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let his people go. When Pharaoh refused their request, Moses voiced his complaint to God. Did Moses really expect the king of Egypt to just agree without resistance? Listen, those who oppose God rarely give in without a fight. And those who oppose God learn how foolish it is to do so. First, God allowed Moses to experience disappointment. Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." Moses and Aaron approached Pharaoh with a strategy that they hoped would be acceptable to him. But their request was short of God's plan. God's demand was too much to hope for from Pharaoh. A 3-day holiday would be more reasonable to ask of the king. Why did that request fail? Well, it had come from the inferior God of the slaves. Pharaoh rejected Moses, made the burden of the slaves even harder, and beat them as a lesson to them and Moses. And then the Israelites turned on Moses and rejected him. That was devastating. Being rejected by Pharaoh was one thing. Being rejected by your own people was another matter. Look at the verses 3 to 14. So they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." Then the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor." And Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor." So the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks for which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words.' And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, 'Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go get yourselves straw where you can find it. Yet none of your work will be reduced.' So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, 'Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw.' Also the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick, both yesterday and today as before? Listen, Jesus was rejected by the world and by his own people. Maybe Moses should have demanded that the Egyptians returned with Israel and serve as slaves to build them a kingdom in the promised land. After all, Israel had done the same for Egypt for 400 years. By asking for much more, maybe they would have had a better chance of getting what they really wanted. If they were going to try and negotiate, Moses and Aaron had much to learn. Obeying God is much easier than trying to convince the king. Second, God assured Moses of eventual victory. Exodus chapter 6, verse 6. Therefore, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. The Lord knew exactly how Pharaoh would react. He also knew that the opposition of the powerful king would crumble under his hand, under his mighty hand. Moses expressed discouragement, but God declared victory, proclaiming 7 promises with the trustworthy words of God. I will. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage. I will redeem you. I will take you as my people. I will be your God. I will bring you into the land. I will give it to you. From Moses' perspective, the task seemed impossible, but he was about to learn about the God who brings with whom all things are possible. When God gives his word, he will do it. And Israel and Egypt will see it. And then third, God afforded Moses the needed power. Moses and his brothers stood before the mighty king of Egypt. Just kind of picture it. 2 aging Hebrew men, 80 years old and 83, in humble clothing, facing the Egyptian monarch who would be wearing his royal garments. Aaron, holding a shepherd's rod, stood in the shadow of Egyptian soldiers bearing spears and swords, and the demonstration began. Aaron threw down his rod and it became a snake. In chapter 7, verse 10. So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they did so just as the Lord commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. But Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, and so the magicians of Egypt, they also did it in like manner with their enchantments. For every man threw down his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods, and Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said. The magicians did almost the same thing. Aaron's snake ate the other snake, but Pharaoh wasn't impressed. Aaron then stretched out the rod over the Nile River, and it was turned to blood. The magicians did the same thing. Verse 19. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, and over all their pools of water, that it may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in buckets of wood and pitchers of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded. So he lifted up the rod and struck the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. The fish that were in the river died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water of the river. So there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Then the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house. Neither was his heart moved by this. Pharaoh again was not thrilled by Aaron's miracle. Then Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters, and frogs covered the land. The magicians copied the miracle once again. Then Pharaoh asked Moses to pray for the Lord to remove the frogs tomorrow. I guess he wanted to keep them for the night. You can check that out in chapter 8, verses 1 to 15. The third plague was gnats. This time the magicians could not duplicate the miracle. They were helpless. Verse 16. So the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land, so that it might become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on men and beasts. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there was lice on man and beast. And then the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said. The magicians began to get the idea that the God of the Hebrews was not to be ignored, but not Pharaoh. Why did God use these plagues as his way to convince Pharaoh to free his people? One reason appears to be his desire to demonstrate the futility of pagan gods, and the Egyptians worshipped a bunch of gods, including frogs. Numbers 33, verse 4. Also on their gods the Lord had executed judgments. God would prove who the true God is. Listen, be ready to hear God's voice and respond with obedience. You have a great day.